AI is going to be significantly impacting, if not disrupting, the software development lifecycle and maybe even the kind of career space for engineers. And that this is kind of the time to kind of learn all of those agentic tools and things like that. LangChain user group and told me that it's a really good resource if you want to learn from very smart people who are really at the forefront of, this space, whether it be agentic coding or creating your own agents or using agentic coding tools to create agents. I'm not trying to always like reinvent the wheel, but I feel like for something like web scraping, that there is definitely a need for a bit of a customization.
Prompt engineering is antiquated at this point, and we are engaging in context engineering, and it necessitates the use of subagents. The following is a conversation with Sal Castoro. He's a builder obsessed with shaving friction from software development, using AI agents like Claude Code, MCP servers, and tight guardrails to turn messy workflows into repeatable systems. He recently rebuilt his personal site in Astro using the same approach, and he's been exploring how to make online content more legible to LLM. This is the AIMUG Builders Podcast. If you enjoy it, please subscribe and consider joining us at Meetup or on Discord. The links are in the description below. And now, dear friends, Sal Castoro. This is episode number 3, and I guess, is this better, or did you want to film at the bar?
I mean, the bar is fun, you can drink a little bit, but it was a little noisy, unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately, we couldn't hear each other, and so we're doing this from now on, and I think the picture quality is better. We probably don't get the ambulances in the background. Um, anyway, Sal, could you introduce yourself? What do you do? Where are you from? And what brought you to LangChain and LangGraph?
Yeah, yeah. My name is Sal Castoro. I've been working as like a software engineer, a software developer for about 5 years now. Currently working at Great American Insurance as a senior application engineer, but basically just means a full stack web dev. Um, yeah, I've originally from North Carolina, moved to Austin a few years ago, so I've been living out here. Kind of what brought me to LangChain is a pretty good question. I'm friends with Coyer King, who is a frequent contributor and a member of the user group, the LangChain user group. And kind of at the beginning of this year, I had a bit of we had like a coffee chat when we were just hanging out, and he was telling me that in his opinion, and he's an AI engineer, so I trust him on this stuff. But he said that AI is going to be significantly impacting, if not disrupting, the software development lifecycle and maybe even the kind of career space for engineers. And that this is kind of the time to kind of learn all of those agentic tools and things like that. He's thinking, I was saying, oh yeah, I think, maybe in about 5 years, there'll be, some disruption and automation and whatnot. And he was like, yeah, I think that's the outer bounds of my estimation. I think it would be within a year or two. So kind of in that conversation, he mentioned the LangChain user group and told me that it's a really good resource if you want to learn from very smart people who are really at the forefront of this space, whether it be agentic coding or creating your own agents or using agentic coding tools to create agents. Yeah, and I started going to the meetups kind of regularly since then, and then more recently I've been going more regularly. So that's kind of how I started. Yeah.
Then when did you transition? I mean, you come from a TypeScript building applications background, and when did you have like your first aha moment with agents or with LangChain, LangGraph?
Yeah, with agents and then using LangChain specifically. I was doing kind of like a project that involved web scraping, right? And that can be web scraping. I have like a love-hate relationship with it. It's a great resource to access tools. It's a great technique, rather, to access tools on the internet that are not, available in, say, a public API or, the the website providers are not super interested in allowing you to have access to this sort of stuff. Maybe it's like pricing data on certain products that they have on their website. And although it's publicly available, they're not going to make it easy for you to get it, right? Um, the hard part about scraping is that there is no defined contract, right? Like the script that you run to extract information from a website could break just all of a sudden because they changed maybe a CSS class or the structure of the HTML, depending on how resilient your uh, script is. So I was talking to some people kind of about my frustrations with that, and that's when I first heard about kind of agentic scraping using um, LangChain's package for a service called Stagehand and also Firecrawl. Those are two different products out there. Firecrawl is a bit more of a service where it scrapes websites and then translates them into, you know, a common language interpretation, maybe like a markdown or something like that. Something really easy for an LLM to process. And Stagehand actually lets you, it integrates with Playwright, which is a uh, Chrome emulator, but it also has features that allow you to scrape websites a little easier, get the HTML. And then Stagehand allows you to plug in an agent to this Playwright scraping. So you actually create an agentic web scraper that can, depending on how big your prompt is, handle the changes in a website without you constantly having to update your script. And I added that as a node into a LangChain. I was using LangChain, the TypeScript version, um, as part of a node in the graph of my LangChain scraping agent, and kind of go back and forth and verify, blah blah blah. I can go into more depth there, but yeah, it was kind of my first experience with LangChain.
So was this, did you want to use LangChain or why not use something? I think I've heard of something like SERP API, which has a whole bunch of different websites. I think they maintain the integrity of, and I think you can scrape things like Home Depot, get prices and such from their website.
Yeah, I had a bit more of a bespoke, like niche um, use case. I had a client that was a storage unit operator, and they wanted to get the prices of their competitors and have them have observability into that. So there wasn't like already a pre-made solution out there for me. And kind of as an engineer, I do appreciate the flexibility that you can have by kind of creating your own tool. Like I'm not trying to always like reinvent the wheel, but I feel like for something like web scraping, that there is definitely a need for a bit of a customization. You kind of want to be able to like adjust the like, websites that you want, the particular information, massage it into data, or massage it into the right form for you, the right model, and then save it in an interesting way and then display it. So that was kind of my approach to it, and I found that that particular kind of plugin or library for LangChain was particularly helpful with that situation.
I could imagine that potentially with agents, there would actually be less customization. You could come up with a sort of generic implementation and have that be applied to multiple websites.
Yeah, yeah, that's certainly something you could do. You're not like writing a bespoke script for every website. Perhaps you mm, kind of simplify it down to different types of websites. So maybe a website where it's a pre-rendered HTML. All you have to do is download that HTML and then extract the information from it. Or there could be maybe a server, like a client rendered application where you have to wait for it to load, with the JavaScript to load and then check back. Yeah, so I found, although that there is kind of like that ideal there in practice, that it's still pretty finicky, and it does require quite a decent amount of trial and error and coding, adjusting your nodes, adjusting your validation loop, your feedback loop there. So kind of for my use cases, creating a bespoke agent for the particular websites that I was accessing kind of scratched that itch for me, solved that problem.
You did mention earlier before the podcast that you were looking into your software development workflow using AI agents like Claude Code and MCP servers.
Mhm.
Could you first, for any beginners who are listening to the podcast, define this? Like, how do they fit in to the overall LLM space? Um, and how do things like RAG fit in, if at all?
Yeah, yeah. So this is a kind of another like a related interest of mine. It's not necessarily building an agent, say, that you would maybe use LangChain for. Um, Tools, AI coding tools are pretty popular. I think like the first like real AI product was GitHub Copilot, years and years ago, and maybe 2 or 3 years ago now. And now we've seen like a variety of both coding tools and then other AI products too. So it's definitely related, but not quite making your own agents. But where it kind of ties in is you can optimize your agentic AI coding workflow to help you create these agents. It will write up, an agent for you, either using, a library like LangChain, whether you want to use Python or JavaScript or TypeScript rather. And then it will actually aid you with that. So a lot of these tools generate code for you based off of prompts. If we go all the way back to the first implementation of GitHub Copilot, which was kind of the first, I'd say, AI coding assistant. I wouldn't necessarily call it agentic.
Yeah, it
It
was very like it was very much here's a function, make this function, and that's it.
it's
It was
like a fancy
not
autocomplete.
sophisticated.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. It was basically just like a better autocomplete that maybe most IDEs, integrated developing environments had already. Um, but it kind of iterated on top of that until it got to a point where you could have kind of this chat with it where you were talking to the LLM and then it would generate code in your text editor, say VS Code, for example. That's a very popular one. Um, and then we kind of had new models come to the scene, mainly Anthropic releasing the more modern versions of Sonnet and Opus. So I think we have maybe I believe Sonnet 3 or Sonnet 3.5. Those are considered very good models for coding. Well, I think one of the big things we found out is that model really does matter. Um, if you have a particular problem, you definitely want to be mindful of the model that has the best performance when solving that problem. And kind of in the software engineering world, we found that Anthropic's models tend to be better at solving coding problems, breaking down larger problems into individual subtasks that can be then coded out. So that's kind of the next stage there is like Cursor, right? Cursor is like a fork of VS Code, but primarily using Sonnet's or Anthropic's Sonnet model. And I'm not actually sure if they get access to Opus or not. I was never a huge Cursor user. I only really used it for a month. But yeah, so it was basically like a better version of like this chat going back and forth. And it would kind of like iterate. The agentic portion was that it would write code and then check for the errors. And then if it found any errors, it would it would engage in a self-healing process where it would attempt to fix these errors, compile the code again, and so on and so forth. And eventually, it would have access to outside tools too, such as your terminal command line and other like MCP enabled tools. So, and that's kind of a whole rabbit hole I could go down also. But forgive me if this history lesson is getting a little long. I can move on if you want.
It's great. It's great. So I think we have covered that Claude is another model for coding that we've originated with AI Copilot. We got Cursor that came out, and Cursor offered a lot of uh, context to the model that wasn't available previously. And now we're sort of in this area where we have MCP to add tools and add context to the model. So I think the next thing is MCP came out from Anthropic. It is this new protocol. So have you looked into that and could you explain it?
Yeah, yeah. So Anthropic's doing a lot in the space. They both have Claude Code, which is a terminal-based agentic coding tool, and they kind of standardized this protocol called MCP, which stands for Model Context Protocol, with the context being the key portion there. as we've been using models in general, LLMs in general, but also in coding, the software engineering, because that is kind of the forefront, I think, of a lot of our AI related developments. We found that context is king, particularly in models that have limited context windows, but even models that have large context windows, which is the amount of tokens that a model can keep in working memory. Kind of imagine as like an analogy is like a human's working memory, right? You can only hold like so many things in your mind at once, like, maybe you're solving a math problem or something like that before you kind of like start, leaking stuff out of your ear, right? You forget the new things, you kind of push out older things in your working memory to keep newer things. A model works in a very similar way. It doesn't have any way to persist data as it's working on it natively. There are solutions for that, of course, but the way that the model works, it only has a limited amount of tokens, which are words and then punctuation or portions of words. Um, and using this context is able to solve problems, right?
Yeah.
That's you provided information. Like context is a great word for it. It's like background information you use to solve a problem. Like if I give you context on a particular issue, you're able to have the background knowledge, and then you're able to maybe have an easier time arriving at a solution. So MCP allows third-party vendors to kind of hook into this context. It allows the LLM to call third-party tools, and then these tools can provide information to the LLM that it can use in the context to solve a problem. So yeah, I mean, good examples are like documentation. So a lot of LLMs are kind of like snapshots in time of information. That's how they were trained. So if you look at kind of like let's say Sonnet 4.0 or 4.1, it still thinks it's 2024 whilst it's actually mid-October of 2025. So it is using, if you're working with a framework, a coding framework that is frequently updated, there would probably be, several, maybe dozens of updates between, early 2024 and late 2025. Well, an MCP server called Context 7 maintains a online repository of documentation for various different software engineering frameworks, and the LLM can use the tools that MCP server provides to both query the database, the repository of available documentation, and then access the documentation with a token limit so that you don't overfill the context. So that's a pretty good example of how MCP is kind of enabling these agentic coding tools to improve performance.
This is a more sophisticated version of retrieval augmented generation, which was simply, I believe, doing a semantic search on a vector database, retrieving a semantically similar collection of vectors, and then adding that to context. Um, in your blog, you mentioned that prompt engineering is antiquated at this point, and that at this point we are engaging in context engineering, and it necessitates the use of subagents. Could you explain more?
Yeah. I'll keep it brief. I won't engage in two history lessons on the same podcast, but kind of when ChatGPT first came out, everyone thought that like the new job instead of software engineer was going to be prompt engineer. So like you'd spend all these hours crafting this beautiful prompt, you'd give it to the agent, and then it would quote unquote one shot give you the result, the solution that you were searching for all at once in one response. As we started working with these tools, we found that that's pretty unrealistic, actually. The LLMs work kind of similar to how humans do, right? If we're engaging in a creative practice, we kind of go through like an iterative sort of thing. Like, you're writing a paper, you do your first draft, right? And then you read through it, you're like, I don't really like this. I'll do a second draft and a third draft. So that's kind of, here's a secret, that's kind of what agents are. They're like, the LLM kind of reprompting itself with either intermediate tokens or results that it has maybe externally, say new code, and then it keeps on going back and forth, engaging in this while loop until it hits a certain threshold, maybe too many iterations, or it has some kind of evaluation function that says this is good enough, I can stop iterating, return this to the user, and then the user can, reply back, is this what I want, further instruction. So the this kind of brings context engineering into it. So instead of making these perfect prompts, we are providing the model with the information that it needs to iterate upon and create a either an intermediate solution, or maybe the final output that we were looking for. And so MCP is one way of expanding a model's access to context, because we're giving it tools in like a natural language format that it can understand. And then we kind of run into this issue now. So we have all this context, right? And as I alluded to previously, or mentioned previously, models have a limited context window. Take Opus or Sonnet, both provided by Anthropic. They have a 2,000 or 200,000 uh, token context limit. That's the amount of tokens, 200,000, that they can fit into their context window. And that's pretty easy to blow up, to be honest. Like, for comparison, Google Gemini, I believe, it's not Flash, it's the other one, I forget the name. It has like 1 million context
Yes.
window. But go beyond 200,000, the quality of your response is pretty bad. What happens is, like, there's like too much information in the context for the model, so it can't like probabilistically select the correct, or as close to the correct path as it can figure out. And that's where you get quote unquote hallucinations, which is really just a model going down a probabilistic path that is not correct. Maybe it's making something up, or it's getting confused. It can't choose the right thing. It needs to stay focused. It's kind of like a young kid with maybe too much sugar or something. They're switching from one thing to another, combining a bunch of different things together and just making stuff up, basically.
I do remember early on, especially if in very early stages, LLMs would try to debug code, and then they would try, let's say, implementation A to fix it, and then implementation A did not solve the bug. They'll go to implementation B, and then that still did not work, and then they would revert back to A and continue alternating between those two implementations. Um, what sort of context engineering would you do in order to keep it from engaging in some sort of local minima?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think either it could be one of two problems. Maybe your reward function is incorrect and it's not able to verify its results. Or kind of like the problem I was alluding to before, there's the context window there's too much information in the context window for it to be able to make a definitive uh, response that you would want, that kind of what you're looking for. Subagents in Claude Code is kind of a way of addressing the context window limitation issue. What it can do, the main coding agent can spawn off a series, several, or one to many, of smaller agents that have specific tasks, and they have access to all the tools of the main agent, but they have maybe a custom system prompt that defines what they do. They have their own context window, which starts empty aside from the system prompt and the instructions that the overall agent, the main coding agent, gave to this particular subagent. And then you can configure it. A user of Claude Code can configure the tools that this subagent has access to, its system prompt, and then it can go off in parallel if the problem calls for it, or would benefit from it, and can have several of these subagents working at the same time to maybe say you're brainstorming an issue and you want to research from maybe a couple different perspectives. All of these subagents can go on, access tools, maybe context 7 for documentation, the internet to, web search, and then make summarizations of all the information that it's found, and then pass this summarization back to the main coding agent, rather than the main coding agent doing all of these tasks that the subagent did, and potentially overcrowding or poisoning the context with all of these MCP tools, all of these web searches, all of these text tokens that it returned from the website, and then it would have a very difficult time being able to pick through all of this information. Instead of that, you just return back, a couple hundred words, and it can use that summary to inform its next decisions. So that's a kind of sub-agents in brief.
To summarize, it seems like MCP is a formalization of what originally was called RAG, and that agents themselves, sub-agents, are a means of segmenting problems into more manageable chunks while also allowing for iteration and parallelization.
Yes, yes. They can also operate in a sequential manner too. Sequential manner. If you have agents, sub-agents that run after one another, say you have a code generation sub-agent, and then you have maybe a code quality or code reviewer sub-agent. It can review another sub-agent's work without the context of that sub-agent to see if there are any issues that it could detect.
Interesting. And so how have you incorporated this software development process into the creation of your blog?
Yeah, yeah. So I've been a bit on the job hunt lately, so I decided that it was time to basically revamp my old personal blog, which I had made several years ago in Gatsby, which was all the rage back then with Jamstack sites and statically generated sites, but has fallen out of vogue due to various situations, mostly Next.js. So I decided, I'll move it away from this old technology and I'll move it to Astro, which is it, it's kind of like a JavaScript framework. It actually prides itself on using the most minimal amount or no JavaScript as possible to allow your mostly static sites, say like maybe a documentation site or a blog. Those are two great use cases for it. Um, you can just have these blog pages with like no JavaScript. It's just text like Markdown, and you get really good like kind of indexing by search agents. The what's the term? The ranking in Google, the SEO
Oh,
is really
search
good.
engine optimization. Yeah.
hmm Yeah, that SEO is really good on that stuff. So I was like, okay, I want to both add a blog to my site and remake it in Astro so that, if someone searches my name, my personal site will kind of rank higher. It'll kind of come up in maybe search results or LLM assisted search higher, based on my technological choice. So I had Claude assisted me with, Opus assisted me with this creating kind of a series of about five to six sub agents that allowed me to basically make a new website from scratch. So, examples of some of the sub agents, like an Astro builder sub agent, it made all the Astro pages for me. And then, maybe a tester or an accessibility sub agent to see, if it was accessible, the website was accessible to screen readers or something like that. So I was able to create a whole, basically like a fleet of sub agents that were really aided me in creating my website and with a blog because I'd never used Astro before. So instead of spending a bunch of time reading through the documentation and trying to implement it myself, I can kind of offload a lot of that basic work to Claude Code and its various subagents and allow them to kind of build out this site for me. And yeah, it worked really well. And the site really didn't take much time at all to make, maybe a few days. And then I had
Hmm.
it deployed to Cloudflare and pushing, within a week, maybe five days, something like that. So it really did significantly increase my development workflow, basically.
Okay. And so, did you one shot it, as in you just gave it, um, I need an Astro website, I need an Astro blog, and then it wrote all the code with all the sub agents, or um, did you do what I do and I kind of baby the agents when I go along and I check its work before it goes to the next stage?
Yeah, I think there was good back and forth when I was initially creating the subagents. I definitely wanted them to, kind of match my idea of what I'd like them to be. And that is kind of a skill that you learn as you're working with LLMs, that the more vague you are or the less direction you give them, the kind of more it will like improvise, kind of like jazz or something like that. It will insert things into maybe the sub agent's description that you're like, well, I don't really necessarily know if I wanted to do that, or make extra sub agents. You're like, well, I don't really know if we need all of these. So kind of in that initial setup part, I'd say there was a bit more back and forth, but once it made the site, it really did quite a good job. There were obviously some iteration that I had to do on it. Adjusting some of the styling, maybe some of the text that it generated, like how it described me. It just kind of like made up things about my background. I was like, well, that's not correct. So I had to go in and edit that. It will do that stuff. It even started like making blog posts. And I looked at a few of them. I'm like, well, the quality's not super great on these. So I think I'll write the blog post. You just make the infrastructure for me, basically. So yeah, I wouldn't say there was like a huge amount of back and forth. It really did like the majority of the work by itself. But yeah, just some small iteration.
It's great to hear. So you mentioned that because Astro uses primarily Markdown, that there's what are they calling it? Agent or answer generation optimization. So AEO, and then there's GEO, something in that regard. In either case, it's basically looking at AI and how it can parse your information and bring it to a user through new interfaces. In this case, uh, let's say Google's AI mode, right? AI agent mode, um, rather than search engines, which would be search engine optimization. So could you tell me anything more about what you believe is optimal for LLMs?
Yeah, it's a really great question. To be honest, it's an interest that I've had. I've been really interested in how LLMs are, maybe prioritizing certain websites, how they're indexing things, how they're surfacing this information to users. I know a lot of early models of ChatGPT, for example, weighed Reddit quite heavily. So they would interpret in their responses kind of the common sentimentalities or sentiments of, Reddit commenters. And I think that was maybe a specific choice by OpenAI. But general tactics that you can use. I've chatted with both Coyer and Colin about this because we also share an interest. Is that you can embed a version of your website that is more LLM friendly. So you could either do JSON or Markdown. JSON, I think, would be for more data heavy web pages. If you kind of need that like nested association of certain things, whilst Markdown I think would be ideal for blog posts, content focused websites, which coincidentally is also what Astro is primarily, that's their primary use case. So other examples are maybe developer documentation, um, having like a markdown version kind of embedded, or you can maybe click on a button that converts the web page from all the HTML, and then it just actually links you to an endpoint that just provides you with the text or the markdown. I've seen that in a lot of documentation websites also. Maybe they have like an agents directory that they can go to, and then MCP solutions like Context 7, where they convert web pages into from HTML markup to markdown, which is primarily text. So yeah, I think if you have like a content heavy website, like a blog or documentation, it's probably not as necessary to have that, but it definitely is an option that you can host that separately or just embed it directly into the web page itself. That would come with a slightly longer loading time for your users, but perhaps it will be indexed by the LLM a little easier that way. Some trade-offs there, but a very interesting topic to think about and talk about. Thanks for bringing it up.
Yeah, so I think that you bring up a good point with regards to interpretability. I mean, we enter text typically into any sort of chat interface with an LLM, so Markdown makes perfect sense, especially when you get rid of a lot of the fluff that's inserted by HTML. Uh, but what's interesting is, for example, today I was looking at marketing information to try to size a market and determine its TAM. And the problem was it was bringing up market data that wasn't particularly reputable. And so what's interesting is that when you do search engines, there is PageRank and there is an implied hierarchy of trustworthiness by the number of links to your website. That doesn't exist, I think, with the scraped data sets, with the corpus that was brought in for the foundational models. So it seems like that, especially, I think maybe Google might be the first to implement it because they explicitly stated that they weren't going to ban AI generated content because they believed that they would be able to surface good, well generated content versus poorly generated content. And that what's going to happen is that there's going to be some sort of heuristic for the model to learn or gauge its training from in order to preferentially choose more well-regarded resources versus things that are not so well researched or supported.
Yeah, yeah, I think that could be perhaps some fine tuning or maybe, model training itself. At the ML Ops World Conference last week, I did see quite a few interesting talks about fine tuning a model where you provide it with a data set that and then like kind of a rubric with the answer, and you can create a reward function that rewards the model for giving the expected result and then kind of provides a negative response for perhaps what we perceive as the incorrect response. And a lot of those pretty interesting. It's like LLMs all the way down, so you have an LLM create synthetic data for the model to use, be judged on, and then you have another LLM that will judge the response of the model that you're fine tuning based on your synthetic data set and then provide the reward function for it. So I can see, either some kind of fine tuning if you're using, if you're a company using a foundational model, or some active training with the proper reward functions if you are like one of the foundational model providers. Yeah, I think that's interesting. I'm curious as to how, Google, OpenAI, and Anthropic, how they will prioritize, that malicious or incorrect information, a kind of a page rank equivalent in the data that they're surfacing. I'm sure there's a lot of smart engineers thinking about that there, but yeah, it does seem to be an issue at the moment, I will say.
Might be even more simple to just create some sort of MCP integration that only provides context that is of high quality to sort of outsource it, and that when the model goes or the subagent goes to do its research, it is perhaps delayed because it has to go through a few more cycles in order to get higher quality data, but that you have this filtering mechanism so that the context is only high quality.
Yeah, I could see something like that. I'm not quite sure what the limitations of MCP are. I've only ever created like a toy server before. I've never like offered it as like a product. Um, I think the tough part is like you need to have like a good description of when the model should call this MCP tool. It might just rely on the data set it's been trained on. Because I do believe there needs to be a certain amount of uncertainty within the model's like reasoning process for it to be like, well, I don't know this offhand, so let me either reach out to the internet or use the available tools to me to be able to call this. So yeah, I would be curious, and that could be some prompting there too. Like you could tell it specifically to use this MCP tool, but I imagine if this is becomes a pretty widespread problem, I do think like the foundational model providers will look at techniques to remedy this.
We're entering into our lightning round, and I prepared some fun questions for you.
Mhm.
So, could you name a tool that you would kill and a tool that you would marry?
kind of like a agentic tool.
Yes.
Hmm. Wow. I guess I'll go with Mary first, and it does have to be my first love Cloud Code. It is a beautiful tool. It really is quite impressive what it can do. There is a little bit of speculation like does the tools help at all, but I have seen like improvements in my workflow with it, so that would be the one to marry. And then let's see. Probably the one to kill would be like VS Code ask mode. If you've ever used Copilot in ask mode, it is not very helpful. And the only time I ever end up using it is when somehow VS Code has switched from Copilot, VS Code extension has switched from agent mode to ask mode. So I would prefer it did not exist.
What would be your favorite small automation that has saved you time?
Mm, that's a good one. Um, Deep research, man. Deep
Deep
research is pretty
research?
good. I'm not sure like what the like the threshold is for small automation, but if you ever need to look into something or research something, I don't know, but something as simple like I'm visiting Philadelphia in 2 days. I'd like to know some interesting things to do in my free time. Run a deep research on that. It will both crawl the internet and generate you a nice little report. Yeah, I've offloaded quite a lot of things that I would spend hours and hours researching myself, like looking through websites just to ChatGPT or the Claude app and just ask it to run a deep research on a particular topic. That's honestly one of the things I've gotten the most value out of.
And is there a book, talk, or resource that changed your thinking?
Yeah, there is a book that I got at the ML Ops World Conference last week. I think it's called The Fundamentals, the Building Agents, or something like that. It's a short little book wrote by the founder of Mustra, which is a TypeScript agent building framework, say a LangChain competitor, basically. Um, but yeah, it's a free book. Maybe it's like 50 pages, a little tiny thing. But you read through it, it really tells you like all the basics, like, stuff about context, prompting, how to create an agent, what tools to use, stuff from memory, things like that.
Sal, that wraps up this episode. Where can people find you?
Yeah, yeah. I think the best place to find me is on LinkedIn. You can look up my name, Sal Castoro. I'll probably be the first one. Got a little picture of myself there. And then I also have a website, which is just my first and last name. But LinkedIn would probably be a better way to connect with me. You can message me on there, have me on there, and we can chat.
That was Sal Castoro. If this was useful, hit subscribe and come build with us at AIMUG. Meetup.com for events and Discord for code and demos. The links for both are in the description below. All resources and Sal Castoro's links are in the show notes. Thanks for listening.